Welcome to Blossoming Brains, the podcast that explores the science behind lifelong learning. I'm your host, Dr. Vicki Draeger, and I'm a science teacher with over 30 years of experience with learners from preschool to postgraduate, and I was a finalist for the United States Department of Energy Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator Fellowship. Today, we're launching into a topic that's fundamental to every single one of us: food. But we're not just talking about filling our stomachs. We're talking about a much deeper question. Can the food on our plate actually build a better brain? Can what we eat help us to think more clearly, to learn more effectively, and to remember more accurately? Conversely, could some of the foods that we eat every day be hindering our cognitive potential? To help us unpack this incredibly important topic, I'm absolutely honored to be joined by a true giant in the world of nutrition and public health, Professor Emeritus Elaine Rush. Dr. Rush is a retired professor of nutrition at Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand, and she's been involved in health and education for her entire career. She has over 200 peer-reviewed publications, and in 2014 was appointed as a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for her services to public health. She has led groundbreaking studies, including the long-term Pacific Islands Family Study, and has been a tireless advocate for improving health outcomes in children. Also, she's a friend of mine, and I think the world of her. So anyway, Professor Rush, we thank you so much for joining us on Blossoming Brains.
It's a pleasure to be here, Vicki, and I do miss you. Thank you for having me.
Well, for those that might not know, she is in New Zealand, where my husband and I worked off and on for the past 2 years, and that's how I got to know Dr. Rush. Elaine, your career is so distinguished, and you've explored so many facets of health. I just want to ask, what first drew you personally and professionally to the relationship between nutrition and the brain? Was there a specific moment or discovery that sparked your interest in how what we eat affects how we think?
It's a good question, Vicki, and I've often thought about it, and I always feel like I have evolved rather than coming to a sudden realization. Like, partly, I was brought up on a farm in my younger years, and my fortune started with cleaning eggs for 1 penny for every dozen that I cleaned. But I had lots of time to think, and I also found that I had this caring gene. I had chickens in a hospital where I looked after them, and I've been so interested in the life force and what means that we all grow and develop and live in this world together. And it makes sense. If you don't feed your farm stock, if you don't feed the earth from which the grass comes, then the animals and insects that depend on that earth don't grow and develop. So that there's a whole food chain, but there's also this cycle of life that includes more than just humans. So I've been interested in how bodies, in particular the human body, works, but I've also recognised the link between the quality of food and the way that an animal or person grows.
Well, that's a great starting point.
Yeah. Sorry, I just realised I should have said that, of course, the brain is the most incredible part of our body. It's bigger than any computer, I believe, even with AI. And, it has more neurons in it than the Milky Way has stars. So the complexity of that network that we have in our heads and a number of links and pathways that can develop from that is literally mind-blowing. I don't believe we can understand it as mere mortals.
Well, that's true. We're going to give it our best, but it's exciting that there are things that we may not necessarily always have the answers to. It
Oh,
gives room to explore and feeds our curiosity. But let's talk about that building process. It seems like much of your work has focused on early life. And I've done a lot of work in preschool as well. So I think you and I had an original connection there as far as our interest in very young children. Your leadership in this Pacific Islands families study is something that I was very interested in. And it looks like it followed children from birth in the year 2000. And it's really quite a fascinating study. So I was wondering what the long-term study revealed about how nutrition shapes a child's future ability to learn and succeed in school, even as early as in utero, even before they're born. How does that, from the very beginning, almost from conception, make a difference? How what the mother eats can affect the developing fetus. Could you address that a bit?
very good question, Vicky. I grew up on a chicken farm with eggs, and eggs are amazing. They have all the nutrients in them for a new life, and it's not different for human female eggs. But the amazing thing is that those eggs in a female are formed in their mother. So as a grandmother, you're carrying the eggs for your grandchildren. So these Pacific Island families' mothers that took part in this study, we were able to ask them about the foods that they ate during pregnancy. And of course, that probably would reflect what they ate before pregnancy as well. And we found that the quality and the availability of the food affected the way, or what was related to, how well that child in later life achieved at school with our standardized tests. So if the mother didn't have the foods that she needed during pregnancy, then that child is less likely to succeed at school. Now, that's gross generalization, that you can't pinpoint one child and say they didn't achieve because of this. But it's the generalization that we get from the data from this large study, which is over 1,000 babies who are now 26 years old.
Wow. How many were in the study, Elaine, approximately?
Originally, 1,398 children were born. 12 of those were twins. So just do the correction for the number of mothers and families, therefore, that were involved.
And did this involve any families that lacked food security?
Absolutely. And it's a very difficult thing to do, define food security. So standardized test for New Zealand, and I believe it's similar to the one in the US, about over the last year. And we asked the mother when her child was 6 weeks old, so that included the time the baby was conceived, about whether she had enough money, and it was mostly about money, to afford the food that she wanted to buy, to afford food for special occasions, to be able to buy vegetables and fruit, those sorts of questions. And we were able to grade the security of the family as far as food went, which would of course affect their security for other things like housing and if they're in work and that. It's all interrelated. You can't just pick on one thing. But yes, that general insecurity was related to how well the child did in later life when they're aged 15, 16.
I think I read somewhere that children with food secure households were 1.6 times more likely to achieve university entrance. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's right. Yeah. Of course, it's statistic, then there's margins of error on that number, but we would say that's substantial and meaningful. That's something that we really should sit up and take notice of, because it's not just Pacific people, it's all people. With the wars and things going on now, I'm really worried about the children, how they're going to
Oh,
be affected. Even in New Zealand now, with petrol shortages, it's going to affect the food chain and the availability of food for our children.
I think that's going to be the case here. And I thought it was interesting that I looked this up in the United States. 2026 budget proposal aims to cut our WIC program. WIC stands for Women, Infants, and Children. It's going to cut the budget for our WIC in 2026 by about $300 million. And that is targeting a significant reduction in fruit and vegetables for benefits for over 7 million participants. So that's a little bit distressing too. But anyway, 1.6 times more likely to, if they were food secure, to enter university. You can only get that on a longitudinal study. So that was a very interesting study. And that's a pretty staggering statistic. It's very statistically significant. And it underscores the importance of supporting pregnant mothers, doesn't it?
It does. And fathers, because there is some evidence about the health of the sperm as well, even though it's the relatively small contributor to the nutrition in those very early days after conception. It does seem that the DNA in both the egg and the sperm are affected by nutrition, and therefore the way that DNA divides and the child develops.
So we've been talking about the mother. Does the nutrition of the father play a role as well?
Absolutely. It's often mothers and fathers are in the same household.
Uh-huh.
Is and they're in the same food environment. So it's the whole environment, the ecosystem of that family that is important. And of course, the father has the role of nurturing, usually supporting the mother more during pregnancy, and particularly after she's had the baby. And that cannot be reduced. It's a very important responsibility to look after each other and, of course, their child. So it's a matter of nurture, bringing it all together in that family so everyone's reasonably well nourished, then the baby will grow.
I've also read some research that when the father is actively involved and supportive of the mother is more likely to breastfeed or nurse the baby. And we know that there's that benefit of nursing a baby rather than bottle feeding, if it's at all possible. And so I think the dads are important too here.
Absolutely. And because all milk is not created equal either. So the baby still is getting all its molecules, all its nutrition from its mother in those early days. And a mother's milk is only as healthy as her diet is. So if she is eating a well-balanced diet with plenty of vegetable, etc., the baby will benefit from that, including the very important omega-3, which are so important for the formation of cell membranes. And of course, as I said before, there are so many neurons in the brain, and they need to be in tip-top working order so that the baby
Right.
can do all that initial learning that they do almost from the time of conception.
That's right. Yeah. And one of my episodes is going to be on how children actually learn in utero, even before they're born. So I'm wondering, can you explain in kind of simple terms how nutrients like omega-3, iron, or choline, which I hadn't really heard much about choline. I don't even know what it is. So can you tell us more about omega-3s, iron, and choline, and how they actually help to build a better brain in a developing child?
Yes, those three nutrients are essential for life, but there's many others, and there's hundreds and thousands of molecules that are important for life as well. But the omega-3 fatty acids are particularly important because the cell membrane and the synapses, how the neurons communicate with each other, send the signals across those pathways that mean that you learn how to walk, you learn how to talk, those things that become embedded in our brain. And I learned so fast by a baby, but it means that the brain and the pathways are adapting all the time, and particularly during sleep time as well. To have the right nutrients, or I like to call them molecules or building blocks, actually makes us and is our mass. The molecules that we're made of in the right proportions mean that we grow correctly. To take a gross example, if you don't feed your plant, you know how it will die. Well, the same is for humans. If you don't feed and water them, they will not grow as well as they could. And if your plant is not looking so good, even when you bring it back again, it might not ever reach that full potential it had before that insult of not being fed properly when you went away for a week and forgot about it. We just can't do that with humans. And babies, as any mother knows, probably need feeding every 2 or 3 hours when they're first born.
Yes, absolutely. Now, how about iron? What part does iron play?
Well, iron is very important for carrying oxygen, both in the red blood cells, and the brain uses 20% of the body's oxygen at rest. That's a huge energy requirement because the brain is only about 5 or less percent of the body's mass, but it uses 20% of the energy. That's because those neural pathways, it's like electricity, it's zinging around all the time, even when you're asleep. And there's energy needed to keep things inside the cells that should be and to keep out the things that shouldn't be inside cells. So these pumps are working the whole time to maintain this steady static state in the brain so that you're ready for stimuli and can respond to it. Now, oxygen is needed to release that energy because we're a bit like a slow burning fire. We burn our nutrients, in particular the brain burns glucose and releases the energy there and reduces it to carbon dioxide, a bit like putting a match to sugar, except it's done in a more controlled way. As well as helping carry the iron in the red blood cells, the iron is an integral part as a molecule or an atom for many, many other enzyme and protein systems that are these complex chemical reactions that take place as part of our brain and other metabolism. And if they're not there, we suffer. Particularly if our iron is low, our immune system doesn't work as well, and it doesn't recognize what's foreign and what's not, and we're more likely to get sick. And it means your brain doesn't work as fast as it should either. If you're low in iron, you might be anemic, but you also haven't got the iron that's needed for these chemical reactions that keep your brain neat and tidy, which the immune system's tidying up all the time. Waste's being taken away and neurons being rebuilt and synapses, connections being reformed all the time as we remember things and store them. I mean, isn't memory such an amazing thing?
Oh, it is.
It's bad.
That has a whole maintenance crew at work in your brain. And I like what you said about that the brain uses 20% of our energy, whereas the heart only uses between 7 and 10%. The
Yes.
brain
I want to
is
ask
just
your
this
brain
little
to do 3 small
hungry
things
little
that
energy
make a
creature.
big difference.
And then
Follow
choline,
this
what is choline?
podcast.
Well,
Like
choline
this episode
is
and
another
subscribe.
molecule.
When you follow, like, and
molecule of
subscribe,
carbon, hydrogen,
your app saves
and
blossoming brains for
nitrogen,
you and
and
reminds
it's
you when new episodes come out.
important in
Follow so you
sending
can find the
messages
podcast
between
again. Like
neurons
so the apps
and
know
those
this episode was
synapses.
valuable.
So
Subscribe
neuron
so your brain gets a
is
gentle reminder
relatively
to
short,
keep
but
growing with us.
it's part of a
So,
network.
one more
It sends
time,
these
for your
complex
beautiful, busy
thoughts and
brain,
processes
follow
around
the
in the brain,
podcast,
control all
like this
sorts of
episode,
things. What our
and
heart rate,
subscribe
how
to
often we
Blossoming
breathe,
Brains
the
wherever you're
senses
listening
of
or
vision
watching.
and taste and smell. and heron. It's incredibly complex. Choline is part of that signaling system. So it's another example of the complexity of how complicated, beyond, I believe, my ken and anyone else's, I think, of, what is life, where do we come from, all those things. But we do know a certain amount, and choline is an example of one of these nutrients, like many others, that we need to be able to reach our potential that we all have.
And it seems like there's when I hear you speak, it seems like so much depends on connection and interconnection and networks of these things and how they all work together. So they're all important. But one other thing, I'm sorry, Elaine, did you want to say something?
I was just going to add to what you said, and it's the balance. Not too much and not too little.
Exactly. It's that old Goldilocks thing,
Yes.
that couldn't be too hot or too cold. It had to be just right. You have to have that balance. That's true in so many things.
To be alive, we need the
Right.
temperature, the pressure, the oxygen in the air, the water, all these things to be just right.
Have to be just right. It's amazing that we survive it all. It's just a total miracle. The other thing is, if you could talk about briefly, this is something that we hear about, but it's something that a lot of people don't pay attention to, even though they might have good intentions, and that is breakfast. Why is breakfast such an important meal, and why is it so important for children when they go off to school to have had what kind of breakfast should they have?
Yes, well, the word itself tells you it's breaking a fast. Now, a fast is anything from 8 hours or more. So most people, when they're asleep or overnight, don't eat. And so that means you're using your stores of energy, which first of all is carbohydrate, and then it is fat, and then you can use protein. So when you wake up in the morning, you are depleted in these stores, particularly of carbohydrate, and glucose is a carbohydrate, and that's what the brain needs. So to get the brain going again, you need to give it a boost with some carbohydrate. Now, in hospital, they would give you a dextrose drop, and that's glucose, another form of glucose. But in real life, what we do is we have breakfast, and it's really helpful at breakfast if you have some complex carbohydrate. Complex means it takes time for digestion, and that means it will slowly release into the blood system. So you don't give yourself a sugar hit. You give yourself a slow release that will release this energy all through the morning till you're ready for lunch.
So what would you suggest? I know a lot of adolescents want to skip breakfast. Some people think that they're going to lose weight by skipping breakfast. What are some easy breakfasts that people should eat, you think, or that you would recommend that they eat?
Well, first of all, the complex carbohydrate or the whole grains. Now, when you think about it, an egg, as I said, has got everything needed in it for a new life. So do seeds for a new plant. But that
Ah,
means they've got all these nutrients there. It's a closed system. You can grow it with just water.
I
For
hadn't
start.
thought of that. That is so cool. Then an egg is going to supposedly was going to grow into a chicken. So it's got everything it needs. And just as a seed was going to grow into an ear of corn or something, it has everything that it needs, or it was going to grow into oats. That's so cool. So seeds and eggs are really good choices. So
Yeah,
whole grain breads,
yeah, exactly.
just,
Or
yeah, whole grain toast with an egg.
yeah. And of course, they take longer to digest, especially if they require more chewing.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's milk or other similar sources of protein and calcium, which is another nutrient that's really important for brain function as well. And then other sources of protein, because a child is growing, and especially a teenager, You know how fast they grow? Well, they need the protein to be able to do that. Protein is the nutrient that's found in plants and animals and eggs and seeds. They need to have plenty to be able to produce these new and bigger cells as they grow. And of course, they need the calcium so that their bones can grow strong as well, especially teenage girls, because that's the time when their bones are growing their fastest and the calcium is laid down for future life. So less likely to get osteoporosis. If you lay down that calcium in relatively early life, the critical times of growth, like in utero, toddlerhood, when you start school, and then again in teenagedom, you actually mature enough to be able to produce another child and continue the chain. But the thing those critical times of growth have in common is that the cells are dividing fast and they need nutrients to be able to do that, really good ones. So the breakfast for teenage children is really important, that it does provide that complexity of nutrients, but also the energy for growth and for physical activity, because unless you use it, you lose it. And by having physical activity during teenage day, any time of life, you're actually reinforcing that healthy growth and development and strengthening the bones and the muscles and everything else.
So, Elaine, you were involved also in another thing called Project Energize.
Oh, yeah.
What was that about?
Well, that was the person who wrote it up as projects, but it was a wonderful team at Sport by Cato, led by Steph McClellan, and she had this vision of making it easy for children to be able to eat better, to be more active, and have fun. Eat healthy, be active, and have fun was the motto. But it wasn't to taking individual children and sitting them down and saying, you must do this and this. It was taking the school environment and making that supportive for that motto. And that included changing the environment, making sure the playgrounds and equipment and everything was best it could be to support that, but also providing professional development for the teachers. So they understood better how to do a physical activity class that augmented fundamental movement skills like throwing the ball and kicking and running and all those things that we take as a natural part of childhood but don't necessarily get taught. I mean, I'm still hopeless at throwing a ball because I never, ever was taught how to do it.
So it was a holistic program. It was nutrition and what they ate, and then it was their physical activities and exercises as well.
And it was the whole of school. So, as I say, it didn't single out any class or child, and it even extended into local supermarkets who started having Project Energize specials, and they would be putting a special on a can of tomatoes and pasta and maybe mince or something else so that they could make a healthy dinner. They made sure that they were the one-stop shop. The people who did it were called Energizers, and they looked after 8 to 9 schools each to start off with, and at the end were looking after 14 schools each. So they drove around, and the kids just loved them, the teachers loved them. We started it off as a randomized controlled trial where half the schools, 52, were assigned to Energize, and the other half were told after this 2-year trial they would get the program. So we finished the trial and found, compared to
The control.
non-Energized schools, yes, the children in the Energized schools had slightly lower blood pressure, they had changed attitudes, and things were moving in the same direction. Now, in the right direction. Now, it takes a long time to turn a ship around.
Yes, it does.
And it's not just going in and doing a short-time intervention, but the district health board who supported it, they were very happy with it. But what really got to me and affected my heart was one of the principals of one of the Energize schools got up and said, since we've had milk, because Fonterra came to the party and gave free milk to the schools,
Mm-hmm.
the Energized schools, and local growers gave free apples. He said, since we've had the milk and apples in my school, he said the lunchbox thefts have stopped. Now,
Lunchbox theft. Kids were stealing from lunchboxes?
yes, because we didn't have lunches supplied, or now we do, but back then.
Uh-huh.
And
Wow.
children will bring their lunch from home. A Marmite sandwich and an apple was what I used to take. But no, some children were sent to school and didn't have a lunch, and they were stealing other kids' lunches. But since the food was there, the milk and the apples, that stopped. And
Wow.
that could have huge implications on those children's futures.
So schools have a big responsibility. You know, I've been a teacher for over 30 years, and you'd like to think it's all happening at home, but a lot of times it's not. And it's maybe not even anybody's fault. Maybe it's just, budgetary things or just distress within the home or dysfunction, but schools have a big responsibility. And it sounds like this was a wonderful program and had obviously good results. And certainly a randomized controlled trial in any experiment is kind of a gold standard of getting your results. So those are excellent results.
Carried on and did the whole of the Waikato primary schools, which is 10% of New Zealand's child population in that area,
Wow.
for 16 years. Then unfortunately was stopped. But at the end of that 16 years, we were able to see in the national statistic for the National Health Survey that children in that area, and 1/3 of them are Maori, Indigenous
Yes.
years, were weighing less. They hadn't grown as fast. They were still as tall, but they weighed less. Because that's what the National Health Survey measures, is height and weight. But the other thing is we went into preschool before primary school, and we were able to show in a very short time, with particularly the banning of sugary drinks, that the dental health of the children, and this was from a preschool check, which is a national program, the dental health of the children was much better as well.
Oh, that's excellent.
Preschools. And that was just about, I believe, banning the sugary drinks and saying water and milk are the best drinks.
Right. Oh my goodness. Well, that's amazing. Well, the whole thing, Elaine, thank you so much. This has been a really hopeful and empowering message, and it brings the power back into our own hands and our own kitchens. And as we close, looking at the landscape of public health and nutrition today, what gives you the most hope?
Oh, moment. However, I believe the future or the younger generations than I am are smart. And they do know what's better. For instance, in New Zealand, we have a big drop in smoking and drinking in our young people, alcohol.
Wow.
I
Awesome.
think it's becoming clear that you do have to look after your body to make sure it's going to be able to work well in the future. Also, there's more awareness of where food comes from and things that can affect it, which is happening all the time. We're having, as everywhere, a lot of natural disasters, floods and cyclones and other things that affect the food supply. And that really brings it home how important that food supply is and the need to be resilient. So I'm hoping that that makes the young, smart people going to be leaders who come forth and say what is really important. And Maori have a saying, what is really important is te tangata, te tangata, te tangata. It's people,
Ah,
material things. And that, I hope, is the world that we will go into, hopefully.
so what you're kind of talking about is a changing conversation and a more conscious generation.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
what we're really looking for. So anyway, this has been a wonderful and powerful discussion. Thank you so much, Elaine, for taking time out of your, I know, busy day and schedule, because I know when I try to get with you, you've either got some exercise program or some wandering to some conference or something. But thank you so much for your time. The message is clear that we cannot separate the health of the body from the health of the mind, and that the food we eat isn't just fuel, it's the raw material that builds our brains and powers our thoughts. So whether it's ensuring that mothers have access to nutritious food, providing a healthy breakfast at school, or just adding more real food to our family table, every choice that we make matters. And of course, that gets me into epigenetics and all that, which will be another episode that'll be coming up later. And then there's going to be a part 2 to this, where another friend of mine, Dr. Gail Bellamy, a certified culinary professional, is going to talk about some of the recipes and things that will support some of the nutrients and things that you've been talking about, Elaine. I'm looking forward to that. So we have a part 1, which is you, and then a part 2, which is going to be Dr. Bellamy. But thank you so much. And we will stay in touch on WhatsApp. How's that?
Hope so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.